Allah had just drifted into sleep on my chest when the phone vibrated beside me. I shifted carefully, unwilling to disturb her. The screen glowed with a message from Mom. I braced for something mundane, maybe a tip about formula or some curated article about parenting in Europe, but instead, 6 words cut straight through my chest. We're moving to Barcelona. I emptied the account. I froze. For a moment, my body refused to register what my mind had already sensed. Then I opened the banking app, staring at the shared family fund. Gone. Every last cent, Vow. The same account we'd all poured into. Mom, Dad, and I, for emergencies, shared care, Brian's recovery. They'd taken it all. No forwarding info, no explanation, not even a note. My breath came in shallow, jagged pulls. Era stirred, her tiny fingers brushing against my collarbone. Warm, innocent, utterly unaware that the people she'd never remember had just rewritten her life, and mine. I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Thanks for the heads up." They hadn't even waited for the weekend to finish. I was supposed to watch her while Brian recovered from her supposed breakdown in Berlin. No one clarified for how long. No one said it would come with disappearance and financial sabotage. But then, clarity had never been their style. I laid Era in her portable bassinet, her breathing steady, cheeks still rosy from sleep. Then I walked to the kitchen, to the paper files Mom had always mocked me for keeping. I found the last bank statement 2 weeks ago. It had over $18,000. I called them, straight to voicemail, texted Brian. No reply. A weight settled in my chest, not panic, but recognition. Of course they would do this. Of course, I would be left holding the child, the debt, the silence. The refrigerator hummed behind me as I leaned against the counter, looking at the small universe of things they'd left behind. Bottles, diapers, her pink sleep sack still warm in the laundry. Everything that had belonged to someone else was mine by default. By morning, I'd start arranging Ira's schedule, looking into legal guardianship. But for now, I just sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. The enormity pressed against my ribs. Deep down, I already knew they weren't coming back. Not for her. Not for me. And yet, I shouldn't have been shocked. Being the dependable one creeps in silently, almost unnoticed. It starts with small things. Picking up Brian from ballet because Mom had a deadline, folding Dad's shirts because Brian got distracted, learning that care always meant carrying the weight of someone else's chaos. I once thought reliability made me valuable, but instead it made me invisible. Brian was all fire, all drama. Tears spilled in parking lots, poems scribbled on napkins, a dozen unfinished majors before settling on spiritual anthropology. People adored her for her chaos, her brilliance, her uncontainable spirit. Mom and Dad treated her like a fragile gem, even when she broke everything she touched. And me, I became the quiet constant, the one no one noticed until the shards of everyone else's life landed at my feet. I was the shelf. The family fund was called a shared net. Mom's side hustle, Dad's lecture stipends, my freelance work. It started after Brian's second hospital stay, in case someone else needed support. Someone else. Not Brian. Not me. But I was never someone else. I was the backup system. The first time Brian emptied the account, it was for a retreat in the Catskills. Transformative, she said. The second time, a failed move to Los Angeles for a memoir she never wrote. They told me I was too rigid about money, that Brian was just trying to grow. Meanwhile, I patched my car insurance gaps and skipped new glasses for 2 years. And now, here I was, left with her daughter, the account drained, and them gone to Barcelona. They called it an overdue sabbatical. The silence that followed the text wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. They had never intended to return, not to help, not to answer, not even to check in. I sat on the couch, the room dim, Era softly cooing in her sleep. I remembered my mother's last visit here, her frown at my chipped mug. "You still don't have matching dishes," she'd said, passing over the handmade tiles I'd installed, the restored family photos hanging on the wall. She didn't stay to say goodbye. That was always her. That was always them. I had been the quiet daughter, the steady one. Steady people don't need warnings. But Era would. She would need more than they ever gave. And I was the only one left to figure out how to provide it. By day 4, my body moved on autopilot. Era's sleep schedule was an unpredictable equation. 3 naps of 40 minutes, or a single wailing stretch from 2 to 4 a.m. Her lungs were remarkable, my nerves shredded. I worked in flashes, editing footnotes for a regional history journal while she napped on a folded towel next to my laptop. I lied to the client about a delay, blaming a mild family emergency. Every bottle was a negotiation, every diaper a scramble. I bounced her until my arms ached, then rocked her with podcasts in my ears just to stay upright. There were tiny moments she'd smile, gum showing, and the air would feel breathable. Then she'd scream again, and I'd dissolve into the wallpaper. Friends sent texts, memes, check-ins. Nobody arrived. I called Brian twice, left 1 voicemail. I typed a 3rd message, asking her when she was returning, then deleted it. What was the point? Thursday morning, after another night pacing with Era strapped to me as she screamed into my chest, I opened the door for the mail. On the stoop, a small Tupperware container, still warm. A note in tiny cursive, "You're doing more than enough." Across the hall, Mrs. Aruz's curtains twitched. Retired, living alone, reader of mystery novels with windows open. We'd only exchanged words once about trash pickup. Later that afternoon, she knocked, handing me a folded quilt. "Made it for the wrong size bed," she said evenly, like a business transaction. I thanked her. She didn't linger. It was the first time someone had truly seen me in days. That night, I sat in the kitchen light, holding Era with one hand, spooning reheated stew with the other. My arms were tired, my chest heavier than hunger alone. Yet for the first time all week, I didn't feel entirely alone. The next morning, I went looking for the old folder of legal documents at my parents' house. I hadn't stepped inside since they left. It still smelled of lemon polish and overconfidence. I told myself I was searching for a last container of formula or a hidden bassinet in the attic. But I knew better. I was looking for answers, proof. Era dozed in the carrier as I moved slowly through the kitchen, opening drawers. The fridge was empty except for fig jam and half a bottle of Prosecco. Cabinets were sterile, as though they'd never planned to return. At the bottom drawer, under a pile of junk mail and a broken corkscrew, I found a worn green folder labeled Spain. Inside, printed travel itineraries spanning 6 months, flights, an apartment lease, activated Barcelona SIM cards. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. Behind the itineraries was a notarized form. My name, my address, my signature, copied from an old lease. Power of attorney for Era, 6 months old, transferred to me indefinitely. No conversation, no ask, no choice. Tucked behind it all was a printed bank statement, a $21,600 withdrawal from the family account 2 weeks before they vanished. The destination was Meridian Trust, a private international branch, not a U.S. bank. They'd moved the money offshore. I sat at the kitchen table where they once hosted faculty dinners, adjusted my posture, and stared at the account balances. Anger should have come, but it didn't. There was only a strange calm. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. They had chosen freedom and left Era as a convenient excuse. On the counter, a pan still had a boutique tag from Portland, $240. They'd left even that behind. I folded the papers and tucked them into my bag. Then I scanned the room one last time, half expecting their voices to bounce off the walls. Silence answered. It offered no remorse. Back in my apartment, I collapsed on the bed, opened my laptop, and searched how to request emergency guardianship in Virginia. The legal aid office looked as drab as I imagined. Fluorescent lights buzzing, a receptionist absorbed in her computer. But when Ephraim Road appeared, tie slightly askew, sleeves rolled up, he greeted me like I was a person, not a file. That simple acknowledgement almost unspooled me. I laid out the documents, power of attorney, bank statements, printed itineraries. He examined each page, tapping them thoughtfully. "They didn't tell you?" he asked. "No, they just left," I said. He nodded, jaw tight. This isn't merely a transfer of guardianship. It could be financial abandonment, possibly fraud, depending on how the funds were handled. He explained that while the power of attorney might be technically valid, the deception surrounding it was not. If we could show an intention to offload responsibility without consent or misuse shared money, we might challenge both custody and the financial trail. What's the process? I asked. Slow, tedious, an uphill battle, he said. I've already been awake all night for weeks. One more climb won't matter, I replied. That afternoon, I began organizing everything. Receipts, screenshots, old texts from Brian asking me to help for the weekend, my mother's message about the money. I built a spreadsheet, printed copies, labeled each page. It felt obsessive, but also like constructing armor, sheet by sheet. 2 days later, Brian finally called. I hesitated, but I needed her voice documented. Danica, she said, clipped. You agreed to this? No. You asked me to help for a weekend, not indefinitely, I said. A tense silence, then a sharp laugh, dry and patronizing. You always dramatize. Think they abandoned you? Grow up. They're done carrying you. I almost dropped the phone. Their words weren't about carrying me. They were hiding behind me. You're being ridiculous, she snapped. It's over. Legal threats won't scare us. I said nothing, letting the quiet fill the space. She hung up. I labeled the recording and backed it up twice. That night, Era had a mild fever. I held her close, feeling her uneven warmth against my chest, and watched the ceiling pulse under the streetlight. I didn't feel strong or triumphant, but fear was gone. The next morning, I called Ephraim. I have something you need to hear, I said. A message came on Sunday as I warmed a bottle. We're flying back. We want to see. No apology. No explanation. A statement, as if reclaiming a forgotten suitcase. I didn't respond. 3 days later, they arrived. Sandra in her expensive scarf. Talbot with sunglasses perched like a crown. They looked rested in a way only those without burdens can manage. I opened the door just wide enough to let them in. You look tired, Sandra said, brushing past. Still at that part-time job? Talbot's arms crossed. His gaze roamed the apartment. We're surprised you didn't call sooner. Thought you'd have questions. Not everyone's cut out for parenting. I said nothing. I let them speak. Sandra approached Era, who gummed a piece of banana in her high chair. Clicking her tongue, she noted, tummy time should be more consistent. I finally met their eyes. I filed for full custody 3 weeks ago, I said. They froze, and I submitted records of the bank transfers, the forged power of attorney, and your failure to notify me before leaving the country. I had recordings of Brian, his voice cold and dismissive, confirming I had never agreed to long-term guardianship. Talbot's jaw tightened. Danica, there's no need to escalate, he said. Sandra stepped forward. Let's not make this ugly. It's already ugly, I said. I stopped pretending otherwise. They were quiet for a long moment. Sandra's gaze sharpened, cold and deliberate, like the calculating looks I'd grown up with. Talbot stood beside her, performing disappointment as if reciting a memorized script. I think it's best we leave, he murmured. I nodded and opened the door. Sandra paused as she exited. You've always had a flair for drama. I didn't think you'd involve a baby. I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I closed the door softly, locked it, and exhaled. Era dropped her banana, clapped her hands, and giggled. That afternoon, Ephraim called. Our court date had been moved up. The courtroom smelled of dust and polish, too bright, too formal. Ephraim walked with quiet confidence, binder in hand like it contained the truth of the universe. I sat beside him, hands folded, watching the judge more than my parents. Sandra and Talbot arrived 10 minutes late. Brian didn't show. Ephraim started with the timeline. He laid out notarized documents, months-old travel plans, account statements showing money drained and moved offshore. Then came the recordings, Brian's voice confirming I had never agreed to guardianship. He handed the judge a printed transcript. Sandra cleared her throat. Talbot smirked, but neither denied the evidence. They tried to reframe it. My daughter is prone to exaggeration, Sandra said, smooth and practiced. She's under stress. Caring for a child, especially one not hers, can bring out emotion. The judge didn't flinch. I've reviewed the documentation. What concerns me is not just abandonment, but the deliberate nature of the transfers. Miss Quinn was left misled, without financial or emotional support. She looked at my parents. Full legal custody is granted to Miss Quinn. The offshore account will be frozen pending review. Any visitation from Sandra or Talbot Quinn must be supervised and pre-approved. Sandra opened her mouth. The judge raised a hand. We're done here. Outside, the wind had picked up. Sandra stopped me on the courthouse steps. You were always jealous of Brian, she said, low and sharp. Even as a child, you were waiting for a way to punish us for loving her more. I met her gaze and said nothing. She turned, heels clicking, Talbot following silently. I walked to the parking lot. Era was waiting, arms outstretched, giggling. Mrs. Alls had come too, quietly without being asked. That night, as I rocked Era to sleep, I realized I didn't feel relief, just a hollow stillness, like the echo of a long, drawn-out storm. The next morning, I opened my email. Ephraim's note awaited. The kiln hummed quietly, steady and warm. I ran it low while Era played on her quilted mat nearby. The cradle I built from pine slats sat close to the shelf of finished bowls. Era sometimes napped there, fingers curled around a handmade fabric doll. I returned to Clay. My studio opened 2 days a week, 3 when Era was settled. Orders were slow but steady. The local cafe restocked mugs, and a college student wanted a custom set for her thesis. I took what I could and let the rest go. Mrs. Alls came every Friday with wax paper-wrapped oatmeal cookies. She never stayed long, just a soft squeeze of my arm before disappearing down the sidewalk. Her quiet, dependable presence was healing, the opposite of what I'd expected from adults. Sometimes I woke expecting a new message, a fresh twist in the saga. Months had passed, and silence had settled into something I could live with. The legal follow-ups were mostly done. The account remained frozen. Brian never reached out. I stopped waiting. Last week, Era took her first steps between the work table and the door. She fell after the third, laughed, and I laughed with her, then cried alone in the kitchen after bedtime. Not sadness, but because I had seen it. I wrote Brian a letter yesterday, not for him, but to close a loop. Era is safe, I wrote. Nothing more. No return address. This morning, I returned to the studio, hands in damp clay, glancing at the cradle beside me, Era's tiny thumbprint in a bowl, and the faint flower streaks from her toddler baking experiment. They left, escaping. I stayed. I built.